I have always thought that men over the age of 50 were not very active when it came to matters of intimacy. Most of my friends would say the same thing, claiming that by the time men reached their 50s, they just didn't have the energy or the desire for things like passion and romance. They said that at a certain age, responsibilities, work and family took over, leaving little room for desire. To me, it seemed logical to think that as men grew older, their passion would fade, buried beneath years of life stress and duties. But my neighbor changed everything for me. He was a man in his 60s, with gray hair that shimmered in the sunlight and piercing, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold stories, secrets even. His life looked simple from the outside. He had his routines, his work and his family. His wife was often away visiting relatives, and I would only see him around the neighborhood, always busy and kind but seemingly distant. At first, I never thought much of him. He seemed like a typical man of his age, kind, reserved, and well normal. But appearances can be deceiving. One evening, as I stood on my porch, looking at the sunset and sipping on a glass of cold juice, I caught a glimpse of him sitting alone on his porch. His posture was relaxed, but something about the way he looked out into the horizon told me that his mind was somewhere else. He looked lonely. I didn't mean to stare, but I couldn't help it. He looked burdened. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I found myself wondering if I had misjudged him. What did he think about when his wife was away? What kind of life did he lead when no one was watching? I'd always believed that older men didn't care about the kind of things I thought were exciting or interesting, yet there was something about the look on his face that changed my mind. Maybe it wasn't true. Maybe they still felt desire. Maybe age wasn't a wall, but just another stage in life. And if that was true, I wondered if I could help him. It was on this thought that I decided that I would find a way to know him better, to understand his life and how he felt when he was alone. I didn't know what I was looking for, but curiosity can lead a person into surprising places. Can't it? I would soon learn that curiosity would bring far more than I expected. I was a confident 24-year-old lady, adventurous, bold, and always eager to chase the excitement life had to offer. When it came to relationships and intimacy, I wasn't the type to shy away from risks or back down from exploring the edges of my desires. I had always believed that age was nothing but a number, and to me, love, connection, and passion could happen at any stage of life if two people shared that kind of spark. I knew what I wanted, and I had no hesitation about pursuing it. Most of my friends would say I was brave, sometimes even reckless, but I didn't care. Life was meant to be lived with passion and excitement, and I intended to experience every thrill it had to offer. My adventures were usually spontaneous, my heart eager to try new things, meet new people, and dive headfirst into experiences others might label as dangerous or risky. But even with all of that confidence and boldness, I never expected that my next adventure would involve my 60-year-old neighbor. He was nothing like the type of men I had ever spent my time with. When I thought of men in their 60s, I imagined mature fathers, men settled into their routines, or maybe even retired professionals enjoying life after years of work. I thought of calm evenings on the porch, quiet family dinners, or afternoons spent gardening. Never did I imagine that I'd find myself even entertaining the idea of crossing boundaries with someone like him. When I first noticed him, it was just passing glances. He always seemed polite, reserved, and always busy with his own thoughts or his daily tasks. His wife was away visiting family frequently, which left him alone most of the time. I found myself wondering how much loneliness lived in his house when his wife wasn't there to share the quiet moments. But it wasn't until that evening when I noticed something in his gaze. That curiosity truly got the better of me. He was so different, his presence felt almost mysterious to me. His years of life experience, his calm manner, his gentle smile, all of it intrigued me. There was a kind of untapped energy in him, something that I couldn't quite put into words, but that I could feel whenever I was near him. It wasn't something I could ignore. For someone who always felt in control of her emotions and desires, I found myself feeling very uncertain as I thought about him. I wasn't sure if this was a curiosity, a passing thought, or the beginning of something far more personal than I could imagine. But I knew one thing I would soon find out. I never imagined that this journey would take me down a path filled with unexpected moments, questions, and emotions. My life was already a whirlwind of adventure. But this experience would shake me in ways I hadn't expected. I was stepping into the unknown, and while I could feel a mixture of excitement and fear, I wasn't going to back down. I would explore this, learn about him, and discover what the connection between the two of us might become. It would become more than just curiosity. It would become an unforgettable journey. He was a reserved man, a quiet, typical family man who seemed content with his simple life. I rarely saw him outside his home, unless it was for a casual hello, a friendly wave across the street, or when we'd run into each other during neighborhood errands. His life appeared ordinary and peaceful. His wife was always by his side, and they seemed like the kind of couple that had everything figured out. The kind of life that came with routines, shared laughter, and a sense of security. Nothing about him ever gave me the impression that there was anything unusual about his life. But as time went on, I started to notice things, little things at first, subtle clues that tugged at the corners of my mind and refused to let me ignore them. I began to pick up on certain signals, tiny movements, gestures, and body language that seemed out of place. It was as though there were unspoken thoughts or feelings that lingered just beneath the surface, like a mystery waiting to be solved. I would see him sometimes when I was coming or going from my own house. A glance here, a shift of his shoulders there, the way his hands would fidget when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, almost unnoticeable. But I could sense it, and that only made me more curious. It felt like I was reading between the lines of his actions, like I was trying to solve a puzzle that he didn't even know he was creating. I would wonder, why does he look like that? What's on his mind? It was strange. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Most of the time, I would brush it off as overthinking, assuming I was just imagining things. Yet every time I saw him, the curiosity would come back. It became a little game in my mind, trying to figure him out, piecing together small observations and clues, looking for patterns in his behavior. I couldn't help but wonder if there was loneliness in his life. Perhaps when his wife was away, he found himself wrestling with thoughts or emotions he didn't share with anyone. Maybe he longed for something different, something he hadn't admitted to himself. I couldn't claim to know, of course. But these observations stirred something in me. They made me want to learn more, to understand him better. It wasn't just idle curiosity anymore. It felt personal, like an instinct pulling at me, asking me to dig deeper. I couldn't help but ask myself if these signals meant something more. What if they were just harmless gestures? Or what if they were the first hints of a story I wasn't prepared to uncover? The first time it happened was on an ordinary evening, when I found myself walking past his house. His house was directly next door to mine, and we often crossed paths during the daily air and flow of life. In our quiet neighborhood, it was nothing unusual, just the usual greetings, waves, and polite smiles. But that evening felt different. I had been walking toward my porch after a long day when I noticed him, standing in his front yard, tending to a small flower bed. The moment our eyes met, I felt a strange tension in the air. His gaze lingered for a little longer than necessary, and I wasn't sure if I was imagining things. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but there was something about the way he looked at me that sent a shiver through me. It wasn't just a casual glance. His eyes seemed thoughtful, distracted, or even lonely. I froze for a second, trying to shake off the feeling. But it lingered, I couldn't explain it, so I brushed it off and continued walking to my porch, trying to focus on other things. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, why did he look at me like that? Over the next few weeks, I couldn't ignore that same feeling. I kept running into him during the usual routines. When I was leaving my house in the morning, or when I was coming back in the evening, every time his gaze would find its way toward me. At first, I thought it might just be coincidence. Maybe it was just a neighborly glance, or a chance of my overactive mind reading into things. But then I noticed the pattern. His glances weren't random. They were purposeful, deliberate, like he was trying to communicate something. Without actually speaking the words, most of the time his eyes would linger when his wife was away. She traveled a lot to visit family and friends, and when she was gone, the tension in the air seemed to grow. His signals became stronger. During those periods, his body language would shift. He would stand a little closer to the door, his shoulders would tense, and his hands would nervously touch his shirt or scratch at his collar. There was an unmistakable warmth in his gaze, a kind of unspoken feeling that was hard to ignore. It was as though he was trying to find a way to reach out to me, but didn't know how. I could sense it in the way his eyes searched for mine, in the way his gaze would drift whenever I looked back. His intentions weren't clear, but the feelings behind those glances seemed open and vulnerable. I could tell that he wanted to talk, or maybe more than talk, something else unspoken, something that I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. There were moments when I'd catch him staring at me and wonder if he struggled with loneliness or doubts that he couldn't share with anyone. What did it mean? Was it just harmless curiosity? Or was there something deeper buried within his gaze? Something that had to do with the absence of his wife and the quiet stillness of his empty house. I found myself drawn to the idea of figuring it out. Part of me knew that this was dangerous territory, that stepping into this mystery could lead me into a world I wasn't prepared for. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and I couldn't ignore the pull. With every meeting, every glance, the question swam in my mind. What was he thinking? What was he feeling? I began to wonder if this journey would lead to answers, or uncover feelings that neither of us was ready to face. I've always had a knack for reading people. I could pick up on small details, the way they looked at you, the subtle shifts in their tone, or the way they carried themselves when they thought no one was watching. It was a skill that had come naturally to me over time, and it had never failed me. The moment I looked at him, I could see it, the unspoken desire, the quiet yearning. His wife was always away for days at a time, leaving him alone in that big, empty house next door. I could only imagine what that must feel like, coming home to silence, staring at the walls and having no one to share his thoughts with. Loneliness is a powerful thing, and it seemed to have taken its toll on him. I could sense it in his gestures, in the way his gaze would linger, in the way his shoulders would slump. When he thought no one could see him, I wasn't blind to the signals. There was something unspoken in his eyes, something that tugged at me with every glance. And as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't deny that I was drawn to the idea of helping him. I knew that this could lead me into something dangerous, but I couldn't help myself. I had always been confident, bold, and unafraid of chasing my desires, especially when they came with the thrill of the unknown. I had experience in these kinds of things, being able to seduce, to tease, to create sparks of emotion that could ignite in a moment. I knew how to make a man feel seen, desired, wanted. It wasn't about forcing anyone into anything. It was about connection, about understanding the human need for intimacy. And when I looked at him, I couldn't shake the thought that he needed this connection, even if he didn't know it himself. He wasn't just any man. His quiet demeanor, his reserved personality, the way he looked at me when his wife wasn't around, all of it told me that there was a story beneath the surface. I wondered what it would be like to uncover that story. To be a part of it, the idea sent shivers of curiosity through me. I knew I had the power to offer him something he wasn't getting. Something that could fill the void of his lonely evenings. And for some reason, I wanted to. There was a strange sort of excitement that came with knowing I could step into his life, even just for a brief moment, and offer him the warmth and connection he clearly craved. I didn't see it as manipulation. I didn't see it as a game. I simply saw it as an opportunity to explore, to connect, and to uncover what lay behind his reserved exterior. He had signals, and I had instincts. Our paths were beginning to cross, and I knew that this would lead to something. What exactly, I wasn't sure. But I was more than willing to find out. The tension was there, electric and unspoken. I could feel it in the way he looked at me when his wife was away, in the hesitation in his movements, in the way his words felt heavy with emotion. And for some reason, I found myself unable to resist the pull. My life was always about excitement, passion, and risk, but this felt more personal, more intimate. I wasn't just trying to seduce someone for fun. There was something about his pain, his loneliness, and the quiet way he looked at me that made my chest ache. After all, I knew what he wanted, and I knew that I could give it to him. When I finally made the decision to speak to him directly, I found myself nervous. I never imagined getting involved in something like this, but desire is a strange thing. As I approached his door that evening, my heart was racing, my mind wondered if he would reject me, ignore me, or make this even more complicated. I knocked softly on his door, and when he opened it, the look on his face sent a shiver through my spine. His face was kind but uncertain. I could see that he was startled to see me standing there. But his gaze didn't leave me. His eyes lingered for just a moment too long, and I knew the signals had come full circle. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," I said casually with a smile that made my intentions crystal clear. No, not at all," he said, his voice deep and steady. His hand moved nervously through his hair as he looked at me. I felt an instant connection, like some unspoken understanding had passed between us. There was tension in the air, unspoken words hanging in the space between our gazes. I could feel his hesitation, but at the same time, I could feel his need. "I thought you might need some company while your wife is away," I added, trying to sound casual. Though my pulse was pounding, his lips parted as if he wanted to respond, but he hesitated. The moment lingered. "I can help if you'd like," I said in a softer tone, stepping just a little closer. My voice was low, teasing. He didn't answer, but his gaze gave away everything I needed to know. I could see the tension leave his shoulders as his body relaxed under my stare. And that was the moment I knew I had him. I would help him get over the loneliness. I would show him what passion felt like, even if just for a few nights. It would be my secret. He welcomed me into his home with a warm smile, his demeanor friendly and kind. His living room was neat and inviting, the kind of place that felt comfortable and familiar. I could tell he was glad for the company, and his hospitality was genuine as he gestured for me to sit. "Please make yourself at home," he said, his voice calm and steady. I settled myself on the couch, looking around at the simple but tidy space. It wasn't overly fancy, but it had a certain charm, just the kind of space that reflected a man who was content with the little things in life. He then moved toward the kitchen and came back with a steaming plate of food, setting it down in front of me with careful attention. "Here, I hope you like it," he said, placing the plate on the table beside me. The aroma was incredible, spiced just right with a mix of flavors that made my mouth water. I looked at him and couldn't resist asking, "Who cooked this? It smells amazing." He smiled again, a bit shy this time, and sat down across from me. He began. "I did. I try my best. My wife isn't around much these days, and I've had to learn how to cook for myself." I was surprised. I hadn't expected him to be much of a cook, especially because he gave off the impression of a man who wasn't particularly flashy. or showy, but as he spoke, it became clear to me that he was far better in the kitchen than I would have guessed. His words carried a tone of pride, a small acknowledgement of the independence he'd found. While his wife was away, turns out I've been pretty good at it, he said with a small chuckle, looking at me for a moment. It keeps me busy when she's not here. I could sense a hint of loneliness in his words. Though he said it casually, his wife's absence seemed to have given him time to discover things about himself. Things like cooking habits, or even just adapting to quiet evenings without the usual presence of family. His words and tone made me admire his effort to stay strong, to keep his spirits up even when the house felt emptier than usual. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the food, the flavors dancing on my tongue. It was delicious, rich, perfectly seasoned, and so much better than I could have imagined. Coming from someone learning how to cook on his own, I looked back at him and gave him an appreciative smile. "You're a great cook," I said, impressed. He looked down at his plate modestly, his smile growing thank you. He said, "I try my best." It's been a learning curve, but I've managed. His words carried a certain honesty, one that made me realize just how much his wife's absence had changed his daily life. I could see in the way he spoke that this wasn't just about cooking. It was about learning how to adjust, how to find strength in solitude, and how to make the most of time alone. I found myself curious about his life, about the things he did when she wasn't home, and about the man behind this reserved but kind smile. I could feel that there was so much more to him than met the eye, and I couldn't help but wonder just what stories this man might share, if given the chance. As I ate, I kept glancing at him, and the conversation lingered in my mind. The food was excellent, but his words carried far more meaning to me. There was a story behind his smile, his confidence, and the way he tried to manage on his own. And I knew this was just the beginning of uncovering it. In that moment, as the warm food filled me and his words danced through the air, I couldn't help but feel that this was more than just a simple dinner. There was something about this encounter, about the connection between us, that felt much deeper than I could explain. It wasn't just about food or loneliness. There was something building, and I could sense it after we finished eating. He looked at me thoughtfully for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. "How did you know I was lonely?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for an answer. I looked at him calmly, a small smile forming on my lips. "I just knew," I said simply, not wanting to complicate my response with too many explanations. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, as if trying to understand the meaning behind my words. Then, to my surprise, he sighed deeply and spoke again. "I've been alone too often, especially when my wife isn't around," he said, his voice carrying a sense of vulnerability I hadn't expected. "I need a woman here in my bed to fill the space and the quiet. And you came at just the right time." My heart beat faster. There was no mistaking the sincerity in his words, no hiding the fact that he was lonely, struggling with emptiness, and that he'd found comfort in having me there. His honesty startled me, and I could feel his words settle in the air between us. Before I could respond, he stood, his voice gentle but firm. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand toward the hallway. "Go take a bath, freshen up, and get yourself ready." I paused for a second, uncertain about how to proceed. There was a mix of curiosity, desire, and hesitation battling within me. His request wasn't surprising. After all, the signals had been there for weeks. But now that it was out in the open, I didn't know how to handle it. Still, I couldn't deny the pull I felt. The idea of preparing myself and stepping into this new, unknown space was exciting. I nodded in response, trying to maintain a calm, confident composure. "All right," I said, rising from the table and gathering my thoughts. He gestured toward the bathroom with a casual wave, and I made my way down the hallway, toward the warm glow of water and solitude. I could feel his gaze follow me for just a moment. and I wondered what he must be thinking as I prepared to take this next step. As I stepped into the bathroom, I let the sound of running water fill the air. It was a way to gather my thoughts, to sort through the whirlwind of emotions that had suddenly taken over me. My mind raced, unsure of what would come next. Was this the beginning of something? Or would this just remain a fleeting moment of connection between two lonely people? I took a deep breath, letting the warm water wash over me. It felt good, relaxing, and it gave me time to prepare, not just physically, but mentally. I closed my eyes for a moment and let my mind drift. My heart was pounding, but I felt strangely calm, as though this was meant to happen, as though it had always been a part of my path. When I finished, I stepped out of the shower, dried off, and looked at myself in the mirror. The reflection staring back at me was strong, bold and adventurous, the kind of woman I had always known myself to be. There was a certain power in being confident, and in knowing that this was my choice. I dressed quickly, pulling on comfortable clothing, and taking a moment to look at myself once more. My confidence had been a driving force for as long as I could remember, and now I felt it building inside me as I prepared for whatever was ahead. Taking one last deep breath, I stepped out of the bathroom, ready for whatever came next. My steps were steady as I walked back toward him, my mind focused but my body alive with anticipation. I knew I could handle this, whatever it turned out to be. I took a deep breath and stepped into his bedroom with confidence. It was a simple but cozy space, nothing overly extravagant, but warm enough to feel inviting. The bed was neatly made, and I could feel his presence filling the room. As I moved closer, I looked at him and he smiled gently, extending his hand toward the bed. "Come," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. I hesitated for just a moment, but something in his tone reassured me. I could see the kindness in his eyes, the gentleness that came with a man who was seeking connection, but not force. My heart was pounding, but I trusted my instincts and took his hand. We sat on the edge of the bed, the air between us growing warmer as we shared this space. His presence was reassuring, and his kind smile set me at ease. I could feel his warmth as he leaned closer, his hands steady and gentle. There was no roughness, no pressure, just the kind of natural connection that builds when two people are honest about their needs. The first time I felt his touch, I realized how soft and caring he was, especially considering his age. His touch was neither intrusive nor awkward. It was natural, comfortable, and kind. His experience and confidence showed, but it wasn't overwhelming. Instead, he made me feel safe and valued. Like this moment wasn't just about passion, but about companionship as well. He was so good with his movements, so considerate in how he interacted with me, that I could tell he truly knew how to connect with his partner. For a man in his 60s, he was remarkably energetic, attentive, and kind. Every moment we shared felt purposeful, and I could see that he was trying to make sure I was comfortable, ensuring that I felt at ease with every small action. There was something magical about the way he looked at me, softly, with genuine care. His smile wasn't forced or rushed. It lingered, and it spoke volumes about how much he appreciated the space we now shared. The sensation of being close to him was different from any encounter I had ever experienced. It wasn't just about passion, it was about connection. He understood the balance between gentleness and experience, and he gave me a sense of confidence in the moment. The warmth of his embrace felt like being wrapped in safety, and I couldn't help but admire how wonderful he was, especially for a man his age. Everything felt natural, easy, and comforting. He was kind, strong, and generous with his presence, and I could sense that this wasn't just about an adventure, but a genuine connection between two people who needed each other in different ways. And as we shared this moment together, I felt a kind of calm settle over me, knowing I had made the choice to trust and connect. He leaned into me, his movements smooth and intentional, and I felt myself responding. His touch was warm, his voice soft, and his smile deepened. as we continued to explore this shared connection. For a man over 60, he was incredible, so confident, so loving, and so very kind. I couldn't deny how much I appreciated his passion, the energy he brought to this moment, and the way he made me feel completely safe and alive at the same time. With each passing moment, I could feel the bond between us growing stronger. I knew this wouldn't just be a fleeting experience, but a meaningful one, a memory I'd always carry with me.